When the United States went to war in both World War II and Korea, many famous celebrities, such as actors and athletes, answered the call. Men such as Clark Gable, James M. Stewart, Joe DiMaggio, and even British film stars such as Sir David Niven enlisted. After Korea and during Vietnam, this did not happen, and very few celebrities joined the military to serve. But we did have actress Martha Raye and American football player Robert Patrick Rocky Bleier serve in uniform. After the terrorist attacks on 9/11, football star player Pat Tillman decided to enlist in the U.S. Army. As he said during an NBC News interview, quote, "My great-grandfather was at Pearl Harbor, and a lot of my family has fought in wars, and I really haven't done a damn thing as far as laying myself on the line like that." During war, tragedies always occur at some point. However, what is not expected is a deep political cover-up to protect the institution without anyone being held accountable. Who was the real Pat Tillman? Was he murdered in the combat zone? What really happened? Why did the Army try and cover up the facts surrounding his death? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Patrick Daniel Tillman was born on November 6, 1976 in San Jose, California, and was the oldest of three brothers. Tillman was a natural athlete, leading his high school football team to the Central Coast Division I football championship. He was then offered a scholarship to Arizona State University. ASU, as a result, had an undefeated season, and Tillman was named Most Valuable Player of the Year in 1997, which saw the professional team, Arizona Cardinals, draft him into the NFL the following year. Tillman was a starting player, and he broke the team record for the most tackles 2 years later. After the terrorist attacks on 9/11, Tillman decided to enlist in the U.S. Army. Tillman made headlines with that decision when he turned down a $3.6 million three-year contract with the Cardinals and enlisted with his brother Kevin in May 2002. Pat and his brother Kevin, who was 14 months younger, both attended airborne and ranger schools and assigned to the 2nd Battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment based in Fort Lewis, Washington, and both were deployed to Iraq in 2003. Their unit was part of a standby backup team during the April 1, 2003 rescue of PFC Jessica Lynch, a prisoner of war who was wounded in an ambush on her vehicle convoy and was under care in an Iraqi hospital. Lynch's actual disposition was intentionally misrepresented to the public by the U.S. military. Tillman noticed the disparity with the actual war in Iraq and how it was presented by the national media, and he also saw how the government and media distorted and even sensationalized the Jessica Lynch story. The Army had problems with giving proper information, and it started with Jessica Lynch, as reported. While the military portrayed Lynch as being in extreme danger, she had actually been taken care of by Iraqi doctors in a hospital. Lynch herself would later blast the national press for nurturing a skewed narrative before the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform in 2007. On April 22, 2004, Tillman's platoon of 40 soldiers was on deployment in eastern Afghanistan's Khost province near the border with Pakistan. Loaded on Humvees, the platoon was divided into two teams, a command decision that was not welcomed by the ground commander and unit leaders. Tillman's group was to patrol in their vehicles into a steep elevated canyon, while his brother Kevin was in the other group and took a different route, transporting a disabled Humvee. Their mission was to arrive by dawn the next day at the nearby village and search for enemy fighters and weapons. Tillman's first convoy was not informed that the second had been rerouted to follow them up the same trail, rather than taking the original parallel route, moving slowly due to towing the disabled vehicle. Tillman's group safely emerged from the canyon when they heard gunfire. Tillman, accompanied by platoon mate Brian O'Neill and allied Afghan militiaman Syed Farhad, then took a position on a ridge, looking back toward the canyon they emerged from and the sounds of the gunfight. Farhad was 10 feet ahead of Tillman, carrying his familiar AK-47 assault rifle. Tragically, the Rangers in the second convoy soon reportedly emerged from a firefight in the canyon, but looking into the setting sun, they fired toward the ridge when they saw an Afghan, actually it was Farhad, firing his AK-47 in their general direction. He was apparently engaging targets over their heads, the very enemies who had fired at them. Tillman then shouted and threw a smoke grenade to signal his comrades to stop firing, but he and Farhad were both killed by the second group of Rangers. Most of the Rangers knew almost immediately what caused his death, but were told not to discuss it, a standard requirement pending an investigation, and told not to even tell Kevin, his brother, who was at the back of the second convoy and didn't see how his brother had died. But this is only the beginning of the controversy. The bad public relations tragedy was the last thing the Army needed, and they would later mislead the Tillman family and the world. His family and the American public were told that Tillman had bravely hustled up a hill to force the enemy to withdraw, saving dozens of his comrades in the process. Tillman was quickly declared a hero. On April 28, 2004, the military's Joint Special Operations Commander, then Brigadier General Stanley McChrystal, approved awarding the Silver Star posthumously for Tillman's heroism. The citation said Tillman died under devastating enemy fire. While top-ranking officers were saying that he should receive the Silver Star and the Purple Heart, natural when someone is wounded or killed in action, and Tillman was soon honored at a nationally televised memorial service on May 3, 2003. There, Senator John McCain, a war veteran himself, delivered Tillman's eulogy. Indeed, John Krakauer's Tillman biography, Where Men Win Glory, revealed that Tillman told a friend after enlisting, "I don't want them to parade me through the streets if I die." Tragically, the government had done just that, and the fact that it was based on a false story made the situation even worse. But why the great cover-up of the real stories regarding Jessica Lynch and Pat Tillman? One theory was that the military was going to look very bad very soon because the truth, testimonies, and photos of the torture of captured enemy fighters at the Abu Ghraib prison were about to become public knowledge. During the lead-up to the 2004 election, Tillman was rumored to be planning to go public with his opposition to the invasion of Iraq and President Bush. He may have even planned to express these views in a televised meeting with Noam Chomsky, but this meeting never happened, and there's no concrete evidence that it was even planned. But Tillman was clearly disillusioned with the war and started to speak out about this just before he was shot by his own men. But instead of being honest about Pat Tillman's death and the events leading up to it, the Army transformed him into an unwitting advocate for the war on terror. Was General McChrystal behind the cover-up? He was not sure of any friendly fire incident, but he apparently suspected that it may be the case. He later told Pentagon investigators that he sent a high-priority P4, or Personal 4, memo notifying top-ranking military officials that they and President George W. Bush should avoid using similar language in public announcements. McChrystal said he suspected friendly fire several days before approving the medal. 9 days after Tillman's death, McChrystal was promoted to Major General, eventually reaching 4-star rank in 2009. But withholding the truth from the family was in direct violation of Army regulations. About a month after Tillman's death, the Army made a shocking announcement stating Tillman was killed by friendly fire. Well, they really had no choice by this time. As they took aim at him, he yelled, "I'm Pat effing Tillman," to halt their fire. Author John Krakauer reported that McChrystal was among several high-ranking generals, including General John Abizade and Lieutenant General Philip Kinzinger, Jr., who were informed on the day of Tillman's death that he had been a victim of friendly fire. Investigators never pinned down McChrystal's precise role in allowing the false account to advance, nor was he disciplined. He and Abizade both refused interviews. 4 investigations by the military laid out much of what happened. The first cited those involved for gross negligence for what was termed a likely friendly fire incident, highlighting the serious failures farther up the chain of command. While there, some of the soldiers who wanted to tell the truth were allegedly silenced. In April 2007, Specialist Brian O'Neill, the last person to see Tillman alive who was with him, testified that his superiors had warned him not to tell the media nor the Tillman family about the friendly fire. In July of 2007, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform accused the President, George W. Bush, and his administration and the Pentagon of actively withholding documents on the death. The final investigation was completed in 2007 and recommended disciplinary action against 9 officers, including 4 generals. Yet many questions remained about those decisions, the obfuscation and the culpability, which forced Congress to become involved. During the 2007 congressional hearing, Kevin Tillman said, quote, "Through the amazing strength and perseverance of my mother, the most amazing woman on earth, our family has managed to have multiple investigations conducted. However, while each investigation gathered more information, the mountain of evidence was never used to arrive at an honest or even sensible conclusion." Another witness, of course, the aforementioned Specialist Brian O'Neill, who was with Tillman, testified before the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform that he was ordered not to tell them. The inconsistent stories, deception, and the scapegoating of his platoon mates, along with the military's lies, compounded the family's and the platoon's grief and trauma. Mary Tillman said she believed the worst, that the Army had murdered Pat despite having no evidence. Despite being described as accidental or friendly fire, there are some serious doubts because Tillman was shot 3 times in the head at close range, and there was no evidence of any enemy fire in the area, unlike the Army's initial report of the incident. So, if there were no enemies nearby, what were the American soldiers shooting at? What did come out was that Pat Tillman was against the Iraq War, where he served his first combat tour. He was prepared to go to Afghanistan, where the war effort had begun, but he was not happy to hear that the focus was now on a different country. Tillman was not sold on the weapons of mass destruction argument, and he did not consider Saddam Hussein being a target worth the casualties. In 2007, it was revealed that Army doctors who examined Tillman's body were suspicious of the close proximity of the bullet wounds in his head. Their report was that Pat Tillman had been shot by an American M16 rifle from just 10 yards away. But despite the worrying details in this report, it was apparently shelved and not released to the public for years. The doctors wanted the authorities to investigate the death as a potential crime because the medical evidence did not match up with the scenario as described in the official report. Even more strange was that Tillman's personal items had been burned, including his uniform and private journals. His fellow Rangers were told to keep quiet about what actually happened. Some people to this day insist that Pat Tillman's death was no accident, and it only became worse in 2007 when it was proven that Army attorneys sent each other congratulatory emails for keeping criminal investigators at bay as the Army conducted an internal friendly fire investigation that resulted in administrative or non-criminal punishments. Tillman's mother was later asked how soon afterward did the Army know the truth, and she responded, "Oh, they knew immediately. It was pretty evident right away. All the other soldiers on the ridgeline suspected that that's exactly what happened." In her interview with ESPN, she said, "He, meaning Pat, always wanted to try to do the right thing. Not that he did the right thing all the time, but he tried, and he defended his friends whenever they were in some kind of trouble. I just think the 9/11 attacks and the aftermath, trivialized football, and I think he felt like he should do more." But this isn't about Pat. This is about what they did to Pat and what they did to a nation. By making up these false stories, you're diminishing their true heroism. It may not be pretty, but that's not what war is all about. It's ugly, it's bloody, it's painful. And to write these glorious tales is really a disservice to the nation." End quote. It took her many years and many hearings after being stonewalled to finally piece the story together. Mary, Danny Tillman, has led a fight for a complete account of what happened to her son, and rightly so, and how the commanders made the decisions that she says led to his death, why the truth was manipulated, and why those responsible were never held fully accountable for their actions. She's more upset about the cover-up than the actual incident. She co-wrote a 2008 book titled Boots on the Ground by Dusk, my tribute to Pat Tillman, but she still wanted more answers, and it would take a long time. Platoon mate and fellow Ranger Stephen Elliott, during his interview with National Public Radio's All Things Considered, said that on the night of the incident, he could only see shadowy figures and had every reason to believe that when his squad leader, Sergeant Greg Baker, opened fire in what turned out to be Tillman's position, there were no friendlies in the area. He stated, "We'd all been firing our weapons at various positions up to that point, effectively enemy positions," Elliott tells the host, Melissa Block. The sun had been set for roughly 20 minutes, so the lighting conditions were poor to say the least. He says on the evening of the incident, he saw his squad leader, Sergeant Greg Baker, engage Tillman's position and followed suit. Elliott continued, saying, "I remember thinking for just a second or two, but what felt like longer, your perception of time in the midst of a firefight can be distorted. That if he'd fired, and without any other information to indicate a friendly position, that I should also fire." The actual facts seem to be the following: that Tillman's group, which had traveled ahead, scaled a ridgeline to provide assistance to fellow Rangers under attack. But the squad leader, Sergeant Greg Baker, in Elliott's armored vehicle, misidentified an Allied Afghan soldier positioned next to Tillman as the enemy and opened fire, killing the Afghan and prompting Elliott and two other Rangers to fire upon what Elliott called shadowy figures, later learned to have been Tillman and the then 19-year-old Brian O'Neill. Forensic experts later determined that Elliott's weapon was probably not the one that killed Tillman. So whose weapon did? Elliott also said that he and others were instructed by their unit leaders not to discuss the incident with folks outside the unit, and that was mainly because it was still under investigation. Elliott also added, "I was operating on a certain level of naivete. I believed senior leaders were trying to protect the family, and I had no idea they were being deceived at any point." Elliott also said he felt very conflicted about not talking to Kevin Tillman about the tragedy. But the cover-up was well thought out, as we can see in Tillman's Silver Star citation. As it reads, "Caught between the crossfire of an enemy near ambush, Corporal Tillman put himself in the line of devastating enemy fire as he maneuvered his fire team to a covered position, from which they could effectively employ their weapons on known enemy positions. His audacious leadership and courageous example under fire inspired his men to fight at great risk to their own personal safety, resulting in the enemy's withdrawal, his platoon's safe passage from the ambush kill zone, and his mortal wound. Mary Tillman was introduced to retired Lieutenant Colonel Pete Blabber in 2017, himself a decorated member of a Delta Force unit who had served in her son's Ranger Battalion before they joined, but he also served in Panama, Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. She said, "I asked him to find the truth, as close to the truth as he could get, and he promised he would." In his interview with ESPN, Blabber said, quote, "In that first conversation, she said to me, if the roles were reversed and it was me who was killed, Pat would never give up until he found the truth." Blabber said he reviewed a mountain of material from Mary Tillman and agreed to investigate her son's death. He said, "The only thing I said to her was, look, in the end, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think, and it may not be what you want to hear." And she said, "That's why I asked you to do this. I don't want you to tell me what you think I want to hear. I want you to tell me what you think happened so we can prevent it from happening again." Blabber's investigation contained more than 100 interviews, 16 of them with members of Tillman's platoon. In 2023, he self-published his book, Common Sense Leadership Matters, Toxic Leadership Destroys. In his book, Blabber studied the mission and the actions of officers before and after Tillman's death. He stated, "The lack of accountability, especially when you compare it to the devastation that it wreaked on the entire platoon, was probably the most eye-opening experience of this whole thing." Blabber mentioned the recommendation for Tillman's Silver Star as, "One of the things that bothers me most about the false Silver Star account they wrote is that if they had told the truth and wrote the real Silver Star narrative, no one would ever have any doubt about him deserving it and earning it. They literally did not tell the true story of what Pat Tillman did and how heroic he was that day. He saved the guy next to him, O'Neill, threw a smoke grenade, and by most accounts got the second convoy to stop firing." Mary Tillman also stated during the ESPN interview, "They've never apologized to us. They've never apologized to the soldiers that they gaslighted basically into thinking that this was all their fault. It's just lies upon lies upon lies. And they did it so tactically, so strategically." But accountability was never in the planning, as the official reprimands issued to 3 high-ranking Army officers were only mildly critical of their mistakes after the friendly fire death of Pat Tillman, and at times praised the officers. Pentagon investigators recommended in March that Army officials consider disciplinary action against 9 officers for their roles in the case. Possible steps by the Army could have included demotions, dishonorable discharges, jail, courts-martial, or letters of reprimand. So each person reprimanded was informed that you should not consider this as an adverse action. This document will not be filed in any system of records maintained by the Army. This confirmed that the Army would not include the reprimands in the officers' military records, according to documents reviewed by the Associated Press. Ironically, most of the blame fell upon General Philip Kinzinger, a retired 3-star general who led Special Operations Forces after September 11th in a case smacking of possible selective scapegoating. Kinzinger was censured for a failure of leadership and accused of lying to investigators, and was apparently the only one to receive such harsh criticism. He was recommended for demotion and retired. Retired Brigadier General Gary Jones, who led one of the early investigations, was criticized by Army Commanding General William Wallace for accepting Kinzinger at his word and for incorrectly characterizing Tillman's actions in describing why he should be awarded a Silver Star. Wallace includes broad compliments, telling Jones he approached his investigation with due vigor, diligence, and professionalism. Wallace writes that misleading Army leaders, members of Congress, and the Tillman family was a fundamental mistake with significant consequences, but he says he understands it was unintentional. Another censured officer, Brigadier General Gina Farrisee, Director of Military Personnel Management at the Pentagon, was criticized for failing to respond to red flags raised by the medical examiners who challenged Tillman's wounds being caused by enemy fire. According to Wallace, in his reprimand, had you acted differently once the medical examiners raised the red flags, many of the Tillman family's valid complaints that ensued could have been avoided. I know that all of this is much clearer with the benefit of hindsight. I suspect that, upon reflection, you wished you had done more to act on the medical examiner's concerns. Brigadier General James Nixon, Tillman's former regimental commander, is cited for his well-intentioned but fundamentally wrong decision to keep information about Tillman's death limited to just his staff. Well, it also violated protocol. Wallace's letter states, "I am mindful that you never intended to deprive the Tillman family of the truth and only intended to delay notification until you had the facts." Nixon later became Director of Operations at the Center for Special Operations at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. But interestingly enough, the Army never released any information on any actions taken against Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Bailey, Tillman's battalion commander, for his handling of the punishment against the Rangers involved in the shooting of Tillman. And nor has the Army released names or disciplinary letters received by two other unnamed officers. Asked why the memorandums are not going to be included in the officers' military records, Army spokesman Paul Boyce stated, "That was the determination by the courts-martial convening authority in this matter." Really? Needless to say, the entire event surrounding the death of Pat Tillman is still unclear and seems to be emblematic of the problems that occur in awkwardly handling situations while trying to preserve a good public relations posture. But people, come on, Pat Tillman deserved better. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.